while I was at my wife's funeral. Greeting everyone who had loved her, my daughter-in-law was clearing every piece of her hand-painted crockery from the kitchen shelves and leaving it outside in cardboard boxes. I came home still in my funeral clothes and saw the empty shelves. I sat down in my wife's chair and did not move for an hour. Then I picked up the phone. 38 years of marriage, and it turned out the hardest part of losing my wife was not the funeral. It was coming home from it and finding her kitchen already empty. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years running a lathe at a machine shop outside Erie, Pennsylvania. If you saw me at the hardware store in my work boots and my ball cap, you'd peg me for a man who fixes gutters, not a man who once held a deed to his son's house in a drawer for 11 years without ever mentioning it. That is more or less how I like it. I have always been a patient man. I do not raise my voice. My father used to say some men win arguments by shouting and some men win them by outlasting everybody else in the room, and I have always been the second kind. Slow is scarier than loud if you are willing to wait long enough. Eleanor used to tease me about it, telling people I could outweight a mountain and mean it as a compliment. Eleanor Hensley was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and half of everyone's anniversaries, too. She kept a full set of hand-painted Bavarian china that had belonged to her mother, blue cornflowers on white, and she would not let anyone eat off the good plates unless it actually mattered to them. She pulled that china out for our son David's college graduation. She pulled it out the night he told us he was marrying Renee. 22 pieces, appraised 4 years ago at $18,400. Not because we ever intended to sell a single piece of it, but because Eleanor liked knowing what her mother's hands were worth to somebody besides us. David is 36. He married Renee 8 years ago. Renee is 34, and she works as an estate sale appraiser, which meant she could look at a room and tell you what everything was worth down to the dollar. I want to be fair to her, because I was fair to her for 8 years. She is smart. She is organized. She once reorganized my entire garage without asking, and somehow I could find things faster afterward. But there was always a coldness to the way she looked at things that belonged to other people, like she was already pricing them. Here is the thing nobody in my family knew. 11 years ago, when David and Renee bought their house on Fillmore Street, they were $52,000 short at closing. Eleanor and I wrote that check without blinking, and I had David sign a simple promissory note, the kind you get from any office supply store, nothing fancy. Not because I did not trust my own son. Because Eleanor said a debt with no paper on it turns into a resentment eventually, and a debt with paper on it can just sit quietly forever if nobody needs to do anything else. I never once asked for a payment. 11 years, not one payment. And I never brought it up at a single Thanksgiving. 14 months before she died, Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She fought it the way she did everything, quietly and without complaint. Toward the end, she slept most of the afternoon in the recliner in the kitchen because she liked being near her plates, even when she couldn't get up to touch them. 3 months before she passed, we had Sunday dinner at our house. David, Renee, and our granddaughter Lily. Eleanor had fallen asleep in the recliner after dinner, worn out the way she got by then. I was in the hallway getting a blanket for her when I heard Renee in the kitchen, talking to David in that flat, matter-of-fact voice she uses when she's discussing square footage. Renee, once she's gone, we'll finally get this kitchen redone. All this old stuff has to go. She said it looking directly at the shelf of china, not lowering her voice at all. 3 feet from where my wife was sleeping. That was somehow so much worse than if she had screamed it at me across the table. I did not say anything that night. I stood in the hallway with a blanket in my hands, and I felt something in me go very still and very quiet, the way water goes still right before it freezes. I was not angry. Angry people make noise, and noise passes. I was done, and done does not pass. By the time I walked back into that kitchen and draped the blanket over my sleeping wife, I had already decided what I was going to do. I just didn't know yet how long it would take. The next morning, I called Diane, our family's estate lawyer for 11 years, sharp as a tack, about 5 feet 2 inches, the kind of woman who can make you feel handled and terrified in the same phone call. I told her what I'd heard. She did not act surprised, which somehow made it worse. Diane, Walter, If Eleanor is still competent, and I know she is, we can put her wishes in writing so specific that nobody can argue with them later. Right now, this week, that week, Eleanor added a codicil naming Lily, our granddaughter, as a specific and sole recipient of her mother's china. Itemized piece by piece, 22 entries, with an appraisal attached. Diane also had me sign paperwork naming myself sole executor of Eleanor's estate, which meant legally nothing in that house could be sold, given away, or removed once Eleanor passed until the estate was settled. I told nobody. Eleanor knew. Nobody else did. 2 years earlier, I had put in a video doorbell, mostly because packages kept walking off our porch. I almost forgot it was even there. Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning in March, with me holding her hand and the kitchen radio playing low, the way she liked it. The funeral was that Saturday. I stood in a gray suit for 3 hours, shaking hands with people who had loved her, my knees aching, my throat raw from saying, "Thank you for coming so many times it stopped sounding like English." I got home around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, still in my funeral clothes, and the kitchen shelves were bare, every piece. Cardboard boxes sat out by the garage, taped shut, one of them still open, with newspapers sticking out the top. I did not call anyone. I did not go through the boxes. I walked into the kitchen, sat down in Eleanor's recliner, and I did not move for an hour. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at nothing. I just sat there in my dead wife's chair, looking at the empty shelf where her mother's china used to be. When I finally stood up, I picked up my phone and pulled up the Doorbell app. The footage was right there, timestamp 1:17 in the afternoon, 40 minutes before the service even started. Renee's car in the driveway, a white panel van behind it, with a name on the side, Kessel Estate Buyers, a man I did not recognize, carrying boxes out of my own house while my wife's funeral was happening across town. Renee directing him, checking something on a clipboard. I called Gary Popoff before I called Diane. Gary and I have been friends for 22 years, since he managed a branch where I did my banking. Retired now. Plays too much golf. Answers his phone on the first ring, no matter what time it is. "Gary, Walter, what happened?" I told him. He went quiet on the other end for a second, which for Gary is basically a scream. "Gary, that is not grief cleaning, Walter. That's a sale. You do not call a dealer by name unless you already had a relationship with him." The next morning, I called Diane. She had the footage within the hour, and by that afternoon she had something else too. Renee had listed 6 pieces on an online estate marketplace 2 days before the funeral, under a business account with her own name attached. Description: Bavarian china. Estate sale. Motivated seller. 3 had already sold. $6,200, wired to an account before my wife's body was even in the ground. Diane explained it to me plainly, sitting across her desk with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. "Diane, Walter, the moment Eleanor died and you became executor, every item in that house became estate property, legally. Removing and selling estate assets before the estate is settled is not just bad manners. It's conversion. It's theft from an estate." Diane was quick to point out that Renee, of all people, knew that better than most families ever would. It was her job to know exactly when an estate is protected and when it is not. What Renee did not know, could not have known, was that I had signed the executor paperwork the week after that Sunday dinner, 3 full months before Eleanor ever passed. She was gambling on the ordinary delay, the 2 or 3 weeks it usually takes a grieving family to file anything at all. She had no way of knowing the filing was already sitting in a folder at Diane's office, dated and notarized before my wife ever stopped breathing. She did not make a rookie mistake. She made a good bet on bad information. I sat with that for 19 days. I kept coaching Lily's soccer practice on Tuesdays. I kept mowing the lawn on Saturdays. I called David twice just to talk about nothing. The Steelers, a leak in his gutter. And the whole time, Renee had no idea what was sitting in a folder on Diane's desk. She grew almost cheerful in that stretch, mentioned once, lightly, that she'd already found a contractor for the kitchen. She had no idea the trap had already closed. She just didn't know it yet. The will reading was set for the second Thursday in April at Diane's office on State Street. David and Renee came in together. Renee wore a blazer like she was walking into a closing, confident, already thinking past this meeting. Diane started with the standard items. The house, David's inheritance, small bequest to my sister. Then she opened a folder and slid a printed still frame across the table. The doorbell footage, time-stamped, dated the day of the funeral. Renee's face did not move for a second. Then, Renee, that's not what it looks like. Walter, I was having some things appraised. That's my job. I was going to tell everyone eventually. I did not raise my voice. I never do. Walter, Eleanor and I paid $52,000 at your closing 11 years ago. I have never once asked for a payment on that note. Not one Thanksgiving in 11 years did I bring it up. I have watched you look at my wife's things like a price tag since the day you married my son, and I said nothing, because she asked me to be patient, and I was... Renee started to say something about the market value of estate goods. I let her finish, and then I answered with one more fact instead of raising my voice. Walter, you sold 3 pieces of my wife's mother's china for $6,200 while she was being buried. That is not appraisal work. That is theft from an estate I am the executor of, and Diane has already documented it. Once she's gone, all this old stuff has to go. You said that 3 feet from where she was sleeping. You were wrong about the timing. It went before she was even in the ground. I have waited 11 years to say any of this out loud. I am only going to say it once. Nobody in that room said a word. David had his hand over his mouth. Renee's blazer suddenly looked like it did not fit her anymore. Diane laid out the consequence in one flat sentence. Renee would repay the $6,200 to the estate. The 3 unsold pieces would be returned immediately. Going forward, she would have no signing authority on the education trust we had set up for Lily. As for the note on the house, I was calling it due, not all at once. David and I had already talked privately about a manageable repayment plan between the 2 of us, but Renee would have no part in those conversations from here forward. David, after a long silence, I'm sorry. I didn't know any of this. Walter, I know, that was never about you. The district attorney's office, once Diane called him out of formality, declined to pursue charges given the restitution and the family agreement in writing. Renee kept her marriage, though David told me privately a few weeks later that something between them had shifted permanently. Some trust that does not come back once it leaves. She lost her standing with the trust entirely and lost, I think, whatever version of herself believed she could get away with something like that. The house on Fillmore Street is being repaid slowly, just David and me, $300 a month. Sometimes more when his overtime comes through. I have never once mentioned the arrangement to anyone but Gary. 6 weeks after that meeting, a small box arrived on my porch. The 3 pieces, wrapped carefully in the same newspaper they'd been packed in. I put them back on the shelf myself, my hand shaking a little, and I stood there a long time looking at that shelf. Finally full again. Lily came over on a Sunday not long after, 7 years old, and found me sitting in Eleanor's recliner with a cup of coffee gone cold beside me. She climbed up next to me and looked at the shelf. Lily, Grandpa, are those Grandma's plates? Can I use one when I'm big? Walter, they're yours already. Grandma made sure that a long time ago. She thought about that for a second, completely serious the way kids get about important things. Lily, I bet Grandma would want tea in them right now, not just sitting there. I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in months, and it bounced around that kitchen the way it used to when Eleanor was the one making the joke. Gary came by that evening, the way he does when things matter most. We put the good plates out for no occasion at all, and drank coffee until it went cold twice. He told the story about losing his wedding ring in a fish he caught on Lake Erie in 1998. The same story he has told at every single visit for 22 years. And for some reason, it was funnier this time than the last dozen. 38 years of marriage, and all it took to nearly undo the last of what she left behind was one calm sentence, spoken 3 feet from where she slept. But the shelves are full again now, and the kitchen radio still plays low in the evenings. Some nights I sit in her chair, not because I cannot move, but because it is still the best seat in the house.